Good afternoon, everybody. This is Maria Ferguson, Executive Director of the Center on Education Policy. I'm seated here with Diane Rentner, Deputy Executive Director of CEP. We're very glad to have you with us today. I'd like to ask all of you to please mute yourselves while we're going through the presentation. It just helps everyone if there's no background noise. I have some commands here, so I've got a lot of you muted already, but if you can help me out a bit, that would be awesome. If you have questions during the course of the webinar, and the way it's going to go is we're going to spend about 15 minutes just ticking through some slides very quickly and then open it up to questions. But if you could direct your questions using the chat box and make sure you choose everyone in the send part of the chat box so everyone can see your comment, that would be terrific, and we'll get to everyone's comments as we go along. So let's get started. This webinar is about a focus group report that CEP conducted, and this year we talked to teachers in 4 states, 5 school districts in 4 states: Delaware, Illinois, Utah, and Wisconsin. The states and districts that we chose, we set out to find typical districts, so no outliers, none that were at one particular end of the spectrum in terms of being super high performing or at the other end of the spectrum. We had a methodology that we used to make this determination, which is explained in the appendix of the report, which is available on our website. The report, the executive summary, and the appendix are all there. So you can get a sense of what our thinking was as we went into picking out these districts. We also looked for states, obviously, that had adopted the Common Core, but that used different assessments. We wanted to try and get a variety of experiences among the teachers that we talked to. It's important to say up front that this report was not meant in any way to be a large-scale judgment on the progress of the Common Core and the assessments. In total, CEP talked to 26 teachers, and I think most of you who work in the education space understand that that is not in any way nationally representative, but it was really great for us to be able to have an opportunity to build off some of that cursory work that we did with the nationally representative teacher survey that we did in late last year and dive deeper into some of the issues that came up into that survey. It was a really great experience to be able to sit down with teachers and have an engaging and long conversation with them about some very specific issues related to the Common Core and the assessments. And I'm going to go through some of those in this presentation, and I hope you find it as interesting as we did. And then we'll wrap up with policy recommendations that are part of the report at the end. Let's move on here. Again, the purpose of these focus groups was to add detail to the 2015 Nationally Representative Survey that CEP did on teacher views and voices, which is also available on our website. The focus for these groups were actually K through 5 teachers. We wanted to try and get teachers that were teaching both the math and the English language arts within the Common Core, so we had a focus on K-5. We did have a couple of focus groups where we had some early grades teachers, and they actually added some really interesting nuance and detail to the conversation, which I'll go into a little bit as we go through some of the things. As I said, 26 teachers participated. They were assured of their anonymity. We were delighted with how forthcoming the teachers were and how comfortable they seemed in talking about these issues. We gave them a lot of materials up front explaining exactly who we were and what our intentions were, and I think that they were put at ease by that. And again, obviously not a national representation here of district, state, or nation. So 1 second, sorry, clicker. So we narrowed down the topics that we wanted to talk to the focus groups about. We wanted to talk to them about their views on the Common Core, and specifically their preparation to implement the standards. We wanted to talk with them, and this in particular came from some of the findings we got from the teacher survey about their experiences developing and revising and obtaining curricula that were aligned to the standards. We also wanted, again, to ask them about the impact of the implementation of the Common Core on their instruction, and also their sense of personal and professional autonomy in terms of their ability to teach the standards. And then their experience with administering the new aligned assessments and using the assessment data. And it's important to point out here, although most of you know this, that the Common Core has been in practice for some time, where for these, with the assessments, they're still a relatively new endeavor for teachers. So it was an interesting contrast talking to them about their experiences with the Common Core. I don't want to say they were old hat with the Common Core, but they certainly have had to put some years under their belt now with the Common Core. So it was an interesting contrast between their views on the Common Core, and you could almost sense some of that, so the newness in terms of the aspect of their work with the assessments. These are still very much a work in progress in a lot of these states, or at least in the states that we talk to, I should say. So let's look at some of the key findings around the standards. Most of the focus group teachers expressed positive views of the Common Core. They thought that the skills that were emphasized in the Common Core were the right skills for students to be learning and for them to be successful in the higher grades and also in college and in the workplace. They talked a lot about the critical thinking and using the text to prove their point as opposed to just covering material. Some teachers understood and saw the value in the thread of consistency. That was such a beautiful way that one of the teachers put it, in the standards across the country, and the idea that everyone was going in the same direction and moving forward towards the same goal. They did like the grade-to-grade progression and content as the standards progressed through school. I think that made a lot of sense to them. And they really addressed this issue that we've often heard about in American education about the curricula being a mile high and an inch thick, in that it actually gave them less to teach. They were just digging deeper in terms of fewer subjects. As I said, many teachers like the standards emphasis on critical thinking and reasoning skills, and in some places, as you can see in the PowerPoint, we have some of the specific quotes that teachers said. One of the interesting things about having these early grades teachers in some of the groups were that they really spoke to the fact that for them, there was a concern that some of the standards just were not developmentally appropriate for younger children. And we had some very interesting conversations about that and what that means for different types of students in the early grades, and how that can rattle the confidence of some students and perhaps build the confidence of other students. So it was very interesting for us to get their particular insight about these standards, unexpected, I would say, but very interesting. They also talked to us about trying to counteract the confusion and the misinformation about the Common Core. And this was not, they weren't saying this in terms of like a political statement about the Common Core. It was just, I think, a sense of frustration with them, that they would have parents call them and parents contact them, or in the course of parent-teacher conferences, talking about the Common Core in ways that were just not correct. And in some instances, this was a result of just being confused by the kind of homework that their students brought home. The homework looked different than the homework that perhaps they were used to. So teachers found themselves at times just trying to sort of bridge that gap that I guess maybe they felt wasn't being bridged by any other entity or leader, so it was left to them to try and help these parents understand what the Common Core was versus what it was not. They also talked to us about the initial work to develop and revise curricula aligned to the Common Core in those early days. That was clearly the case for a lot of these teachers. They worked closely with their colleagues. Again, we really picked up on that collaboration aspect of teacher lives as we reported in the teacher survey. They definitely worked together and figured out ways to develop curricula that were aligned to the Common Core, because in a lot of places at the beginning they just didn't have it. So they, as teachers invariably do, they sort of dug down and figured out a way to do it. Some teachers felt inadequate in terms of their ability to be prepared for designing curricula, especially in the early years. Some teachers found it very empowering and very exciting. You could certainly tell that it was, you know, a positive experience for some and perhaps a more negative experience for others. So there was a lot of conversations about cart coming before the horse and having to teach the standards without perhaps having the best tools there in the beginning to do that. But again, these consistent themes of teachers, you know, coming together and figuring out a way of doing this. One of the other areas that they mentioned, which I think is interesting, was just in terms also, and it gets into it with a little bit of curriculum instruction, the interpretation of the standards and how at times the definition of mastery could be different for different teachers. So again, it's sort of this interpretation of the standards and confusion around that, which does seem to have abated, you know, as time goes on. So, so we'll move into the findings related specifically to curriculum and instruction. Teachers said, and this reiterates the point that I just made, that they would have benefited from examples of student work that actually demonstrates mastery. You know, so they wanted examples of what this looks like, because they didn't really have anything to go on, so they would use, you know, their own experience, their own common sense, talking to other teachers. But they thought it would be really helpful if they actually could see videos or examples of what mastery of the standards actually looks like. So when they were faced with this question of interpretation, they had something to go on in terms of you know, what is considered to be mastery. Again, several teachers said that it has changed instruction for them in positive ways, and the student skills that were being developed, were the right ones. Some teachers said that they did feel pressure to prepare the students for the academic demands of the standards, knowing that that was going to result in them losing time for certain socio-emotional activities and other activities that are also important for them in terms of their ability to be, you know, lifelong learners and to work well in groups and all this kind of thing. So there were teachers that felt like there was a little bit of a trade-off going on, and certainly the early grades teachers made this point as well. They did talk about, you know, the importance of kids in those early grades and struggles with acting out and having an opportunity to be able to address some of those social and emotional issues without always having to focus so hard on preparing them for the academic rigor that is part and parcel of the standards, knowing even that that was a good thing and that was something that they were, you know, obviously very positive about. There was this cost that came along with it. Here's a chart that sort of just looks at, in terms of the elementary school teachers, their level of autonomy under the current standards compared with previous standards. So you get a sense there about that there's really no major loss of autonomy going on with the standards in terms of this particular group of teachers. But again, these findings were consistent with the larger groups of teachers that we spoke to as part of that national survey that we did last year. And again, the majority of teachers said their autonomy has stayed the same or increased. And they had varied views about, but they did tend to agree about their autonomy being the same as it was or increasing since the years of the Common Core, since Common Core was adopted. And again, they talk, as you can see in that quote there, about the progression of time. And you know, I feel like this is a very important point to make, that, and we certainly got this from the teachers when we were talking to them, is teachers really do like to take in new material like the standards and make it their own. They put their own brand on it, if you will, and now that they've had a couple of years to get used to these standards, you did get a sense that they were feeling a little bit more perhaps bold or confident in their ability to make the standards you know, work for them in their classroom. And as we talked about in the National Teacher Survey, you know, this can be a positive and a negative thing, because there is this question of consistency and continuity with the standards and the actual meaning of the commonness of them and how much that gets diffused in terms of curriculum choices and how teachers teach. So I'm putting a little feather in that because I want, when we go through the questions here, it might be interesting to get some questions or to even just hear some opinions from you guys on that topic in general. Okay, so let's move down to the assessments piece now. As I said, we spoke to teachers in 4 states, and each state had a different history in terms of their assessment choices. One was PARCC, one was Smarter Balance. One had developed its own assessments, and one had used Smarter Balance and then had made the switch to a homegrown assessment. So got a little bit of a variety there, even though our focus group number of teachers was relatively small. So the teachers said the information they received from the state math and ELL assessments was not very helpful. And a lot of that came down to timing and also the format of the student scores that they received. There were a lot of different variations on this theme in terms of the teachers that we talked to, but the fact that perhaps that information was not as helpful as it could have been really speaks to this idea that the assessments, maybe for them, they still see them as a work in progress. Very optimistic. I think that things can get better, but felt like there were certain issues that as teachers, the way that information was being shared with them was not as helpful as it could be in terms of informing their teacher practice. They do use assessment data to guide their instruction, but found that other tests were more informative and useful for this purpose. And we talked a lot about some of the different tests that teachers are using and the timeliness of the data and the, I don't know if this is a word, but actionality or actionability of the data in terms of helping them be able to address specific issues in their classroom. They also spoke, and again, this was a theme that was reiterated in our national survey, that testing just takes too long and it puts too much stress on students, and that they would like to, and these are my words, not theirs, they'd like to find maybe a middle ground. You know, they did not want to do away with assessments and saw the value in assessments, but felt like maybe there was a calibration that needed to happen, and they were speaking to their own community. Of course, to just make right-size things a little bit in terms of the time that was being put into testing and the return on that investment in terms of them being able to actually put information to work in their classroom. Other teachers, and this was again an interesting topic that came up that we actually you know, didn't predict. They were talked about the differences in keyboarding skills and how that could impact test results, and how some kids were, you know, computer kids. They were computer kids from the day they were born. They spent a lot of time keyboarding, but that there were other students who just didn't have that as an interest, and they wondered whether that difference was actually going to be something that was important in terms of test scores and how students reacted to these tests, the amount of stress that it put them under, how they felt about it. You know, when you're navigating an environment that you're more comfortable with, one would presume that you're going to have more confidence. So they sort of asked these questions in and among themselves and with us, and wondered what the impact of those differences in sort of technological ability might be in terms of overall test scores. And here's a graphic that shows what teachers relied on, the different tools and avenues they took to understand student test data. And again, that theme of collaboration so strong among teachers, that working with the other teachers in their school, you know, clearly something that is done by a great deal of teachers, self-study. School and district sponsored professional development, of course, is up there as well. There are a lot of different ways that teachers are trying to crack this nut in terms of understanding their student test data. Teachers also talked about scores, their student scores being available on portals, on online portals, and in a lot of places this was the case. And for some teachers that had the training how to use and navigate these online portals, they were, you know, relatively useful, but for a lot of them, the portals themselves represented an obstacle in terms of just being able to figure out how to get to that data and how to use that portal. Again, elementary school teachers and their ideas on the amount of time, again, very consistent with the larger national survey, just feel that there is just too much time being spent on tests at this point. And then data on which tests teachers would like to keep. Those teacher-created quizzes, those teacher-created tests, obviously, you can see from the chart, are the ones that teachers like. But again, the numbers are pretty strong about the district and state-mandated tests too, not overwhelming cries to get rid of or eliminate those tests. You know, it's important, I think, to note that the testing issue is such a big deal right now and getting so much press that you know, there's a lot of insecurities associated, I think, with the new assessments as a result of that larger national conversation about testing, and it really speaks to the complexity of the testing debate. There's a lot of different themes that go into when you ask teachers about testing, and a lot of these came up in our conversations. They talk about teacher evaluations, they talk about technology concerns, they talk about differences in test prep and resources for test prep. So this is a complicated issue, and I just want to make sure that we say that up front, that these are a couple of insights into this very complicated issue, but certainly don't speak to the whole testing conversation that's going on right now. So let's get to the policy recommendations, and then we can open up the floor for some questions. So obviously, providing teachers with high-quality Common Core aligned curricular materials and textbooks would be a very good thing and would probably help teachers be able to do the difficult work of teaching the standards without having to scramble so much. You know, they are clearly doing the work to try and find materials that are aligned to the Common Core, but it is time consuming and it is hard, and many teachers spoke to that, about the challenges associated with deconstructing the standards and finding the time to work with their colleagues and putting together curricula that they feel is aligned to the standards. This is all extra work that they have to do. So creating some consistency with materials that are aligned and, you know, vetted to be aligned to the Common Core, because God knows there's plenty that have that, you know, Common Core aligned sticker on them. But whether or not those are indeed quality materials that are aligned can be a question mark and a tough question to answer for a lot of teachers and even district leaders. Teachers were very clear about wanting examples of teachers teaching the Common Core and examples of student mastery. They spoke about how it would be helpful to have videos of other teachers teaching the Common Core and examples of student work to be able to compare some of the things that they were doing with other teachers and making sure that they were indeed on the right track. This recommendation about connecting teacher voices to policy making, especially at the local level, really echoes the findings of our national survey as well. It is difficult. We often talk about that you know, education systems at the local level as well as the national level are not nimble. It is difficult to connect teacher voices to policymaking in significant, real ways that sort of go beyond just lip service. So figuring out ways that can happen. One of the suggestions that we list in the report is this notion of district research practice partnerships. So the idea that research teachers are sort of your frontline researchers for the work going on in districts, and working with researchers to look at what teachers are doing and evaluate what's working and what's not working, to create some sort of formalized research process that really does involve those frontline teachers in the larger decision making going on at the local level. And then engaging in outreach around the standards with both teachers but also external stakeholders. And this gets to that notion of teachers needing to try and explain what the Common Core and what the standards and what the assessments are about to parents that are confused or perhaps on the receiving end of some misinformation. Whereas teachers are excellent communicators about this, it should not fall on their shoulders to be the only ones that are doing this important work. Local leaders and others who support the standards need to engage the community and help them understand what the standards are about, why the district has made the choices it's made in terms of whether it be the Common Core or any other standards, and what assessments they're using, so the larger external stakeholder pool understands what's happening and is updated on what's happening. And that can help break down some of that misunderstanding that is common in some places, and perhaps build support or at least create an opportunity for a more meaningful dialogue about what's going on within the school system. And again, in this, we've said this before, is, recognizing that the new assessments are still a work in progress. They are new. And this is some field level feedback about these teachers' experience with the assessments. Concerns about the length of the assessments and the time testing takes is not unique to just this focus group report. These are things that have been talked about at the national and local level for some time. So addressing that concern as we move forward is obviously something that probably requires some time and energy around. And then thinking about the computer skills issue, and at the local level, thinking about if there are indeed differences around computer skills. Are there actions to take that might be able to level the playing field for students? And one of the other suggestions that came from the teachers was this idea of administering interim assessments throughout the school year, which of course is part of ESSA and the new flexibilities around ESSA, using the interim assessments, and as that can result in a single summative score. That was something that we also heard in the field as well. So providing teachers with that timely assessment data in a useful format and giving them the training that they need to understand it is, of course, all goals and recommendations that would be very helpful in them recognizing and understanding that the assessments, that there are maybe some challenges with them, but that there are improvements that can be made. So I'm going to wrap it up there, and then we'll jump in here and take some questions. Okay, let's see. I'm going to just tick down my line here. So we have a question that says, the data portals you mentioned are new to many teachers. Did your focus group teachers receive any technical support in using the portals themselves, as well as support for understanding the data that can be found in those portals? And I'm looking at Diane as I answer that question. I'll give my short answer first, and Diane, please chime in. As I recall, there were mixed results on this. There were some teachers that were trained on how to use the portal, and obviously those teachers had more positive feelings about their ability to access student test data and use it in a way that helped them inform their classroom. But there were other teachers who felt like the portals just represented another technology barrier for them that they had to figure out and spend the time to figure out to be able to find the scores that they wanted to find. When they're using the interim assessments that can, that they know and understand and can provide them with data, they're sort of stuck in the middle there because they know that through the portals they may find better data that can help them do their job better, but at the same time they're pressed for time and they just may want to go with what they know. Diane, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, Maria's right in her characterization, but one interesting thing that came up in a couple of the focus groups where the teachers were also parents and had received reports from the district and state on how their own children had performed on the assessments. And they kind of agreed that even if they just got those parent reports, that would give them more information on their students than that they currently get, because often they just would get a single test score reported for each student in their class. In one of the focus groups, two teachers did engage in some more extensive training, and after completing that training, they felt like they really understood how to navigate the portals and found the information very useful and helpful. So it may be an interim step is providing those reports, but a longer-term solution is more training to give teachers the access and information they need.
Okay. I'm going to tick down to the next question here. What were some of the standards that K through 2 teachers felt were not developmentally appropriate, and why? I'm going to direct you to the report because there are some quotes in there that go directly to this. They talked about, well, I would say larger, this isn't specific to a standard, but this idea that in the early grades, the kids that felt like they really weren't moving as fast as some of their peers, that it could have, they were concerned about the confidence factor with these students. One teacher said that kindergarten has become supercharged, and what is more like what was first grade, used to be taught in first grade in terms of expectation, is now expected for kindergarten. reading specifically here, by the end of kindergarten, students are expected to be able to write 3 sentences and read at least 40 sight words, but this overlooks the reality that some kindergartners enter school not knowing how to hold a pencil or sit in a chair, and none of that can be accounted for with the Common Core. So again, no specific, they're not naming specific standards here, but this idea that that the rigor line has shifted a bit down, and there's this concern that kids can't be kids in the early grades, they can't learn through play anymore. That has become a little bit more of a charged environment for them, because what they're being asked to do is just greater than it used to be at those early years. The early grades teachers that we spoke to were, well, I have to say, they were pretty passionate on this topic. So it was very interesting to sort of hear the back and forth between one another about them, and this concern that that if they don't really get these things in the early grades, then okay, what's going to happen down the line? Okay, this is from Vanessa. How does the study define autonomy?
Seeing flip back to figure 1. In the slides, we showed the survey findings. What we did with our nationally representative survey for this report is we did a special subset of survey responses just of elementary school teachers, and so that's what you see in these tables and graphs. It's a nationally representative sample of elementary school teachers. So you can see within the bigger survey how we defined autonomy. We asked them, do you feel like you have autonomy, you have control over your instructional strategies, curriculum, collaboration, in both math and ELA? The conversations in the focus groups were a little bit more loose. It was sort of a discussion about, do you feel more restricted under the Common Core than you did under the previous standards? And we talked about these different aspects of it, but we didn't strictly ask, about instructional strategies, about curriculum, and about collaboration. But in general, the idea and the thought behind it was, do they feel like they have control over different aspects of their classroom, or do they feel like things were coming at them top down?
Okay. Are the assessment providers willing to make changes? That's a good question, and not ones that we can answer, obviously, because we're not assessment providers. I'm not sure what, I think that's sort of beyond our area of expertise to answer. I suspect that they do so much work with folks in the field and get feedback just like this, so I suspect that
Right.
I'm sure they're taking it all in and going to do the best they can to try and help the people who use their assessments, and it's the best that I can answer that. If we have any assessment providers listening to the webinar and you want to chime in and answer, go for it, and we'll make sure everyone sees it. Where are teachers going to get examples of Common Core aligned teaching and practice? Great question, actually. So perhaps a couple of different places. I mean, there are a lot of foundations that are supporting really great work around the Common Core. Perhaps there could be a library of videos that demonstrate practice and show what mastery looks like. I know there are different places where people are getting Common Core materials. The Common Core website has stuff. And teachers talked a lot about stealing from other states and other districts and going online. Teachers Pay Teachers was something that I know I had never heard of before doing this work. And it came up in so many conversations within these focus groups, I can't even tell you. So there are places where teachers are pulling this stuff, free resources online, or Teachers Pay Teachers, not always free. But perhaps that might be a great project for a group to try and put together some training videos around the Common Core if they don't already exist. Although I'm seeing here right now that the National Board for Professional Teaching Standards has a video library with cases tagged to the Common Core, and I think I knew that because I remember doing a panel with Peggy, and she had mentioned it. So thank you, Lisa Stooksbury, for telling everybody that. I appreciate you jumping in there. Okay, let me go back here and make sure I'm not missing any of these questions. Okay, we entered on teaching and practice. How well are textbooks matched with the Common Core? Again, good question. And this focus groups cannot answer that conclusively. It can reiterate what the teachers who we spoke to said, and in some instances, the scenario was a little better than others. The one scenario I do remember was the teachers who talked about their district making the purchase of textbooks right before they implemented the Common Core, so outlaying all of that money to get textbooks and then implementing the Common Core and, you know, not having the resources to just now turn and get new textbooks because they had already put out the money to get other textbooks. So, you know, there are some very real issues that districts are facing as they make these decisions. So I would imagine in some places are struggling a little bit more than others. And I know Bill Schmidt and Morgan Polikoff and some other people have done studies on that alignment issue related specifically to textbooks. So there is research out there about this, but I don't think that can be answered best with our research. Okay, from Rebecca, can you give us any examples of how teachers are involved at the local, state, and national level as per your first policy recommendation? Another great question, Rebecca. You know, for me, the best example I think of is when you have these research practice partnerships that involve researchers either from universities. You know, we're housed here at George Washington University and at the Graduate School of Education and Human Development here at the university has been engaged in a research partnership with DCPS. So when you have researchers working with teachers who can use teachers, again, as those frontline investigators and who can involve them in the larger research project on what the particular intervention is or whatever tool is being used, you know, to me, that's a very good way to allow teachers to do what they do best, but to also play an important role in the research and evaluation component of what's going on in their district. And, you know, presumably, the hope is that that research is then used to adjust policy. I think it gets a lot thornier at the national level and even at the state level. You know, you can have teachers sit on boards and advisory panels and all that kind of stuff, but, you know, but there really has to be a process that makes it meaningful for them so they're not just the teacher at the table and don't really have any power. But I do think that it's much more challenging at the state and national level and just requires a little bit more intent and process about making it happen. Diane, do you have anything to add?
I mean, I'd say, too, that, you know, under the new Elementary and Secondary Education Act, there are requirements for involvement in teachers and other stakeholders in a bunch of decisions, but what you hope happens is that a real process and not just one of ticking the box of, you know, oh, there was a teacher here in this group, so, you know, he or she is speaking for all teachers. I think that there's, from the focus groups, I got a sense of frustration sometimes that they knew what was going on with the standards and assessments in their classrooms, and then they'd listen to state leaders speak in an entirely different way about them, and there was just a complete disconnect from what the state leaders were saying versus what they knew as teachers. And sometimes the state leaders, frankly, don't want to actually hear from teachers about how things are really working. So that's a whole other issue, is you can give them a voice, but will they be heard? So we need to separate that out. But, you know, I think we all would be a whole lot better off if teachers are actually consulted and listened to in education policy decisions at local, state, and national level.
Okay, so what plans do you have to follow up on the recent report on teacher focus groups? So the third part of this ongoing body of work for CEP is a district survey that will be coming out in the next month or two that looks at, again, these issues related to the Common Core and assessments and the standards, and a source of another dimension of information. So we've talked to teachers at the national level, we've dove deep here and talked to some specific teachers in specific states, and now we'll get the district leaders' view as well. And it's sort of just a nice composite way to sort of get a large view around this very, you know, complicated endeavor that is going on in states and in local school districts. So that'll be the next one that is teed up. Oh, did I miss one? Okay. Is there a reason state assessments occur in the spring other than it's always been that way?
Well, I think one reason why it's always been that way is the use of the test scores for accountability. So in one way you could argue that you wanted the opportunity for students to learn the most possible before you had them take the test, and then made some accountability judgments on the schools and the districts. So and I'm sure that it's a summative assessment. It's the end of the school year. So in part, yes, that's the way it always has been, but it's also largely the function of the tests. But that's not to say with some ingenuity and probably money and hard work that you couldn't change that around to have segmented interim assessments where you still would get that summative score at the end. And those interim assessments could be used to inform teaching and learning and, measure how well kids are doing on certain concepts earlier in the year instead of at the end. So we don't think that that's going to be a simple thing to do, but it probably makes some sense to start thinking about it.
Okay. You mentioned that teachers use district or local assessments more often than state assessments to drive instructional changes. Can you talk about what those district assessments offer the state assessments don't? Yeah, and the report gives some really interesting detail around this. In a lot of ways, it really came down to the timing of the quickness by which they can get the information so they can actually do something about it, and to what extent the information was detailed enough that it gave them some specific insights into maybe what they were doing in the classroom or what a particular student was struggling with. So again, it comes down to the actionability of the information that they were getting. And within the report, there's actually some teacher quotes on some specific assessments that they use and that they felt were very helpful. So they actually give some specific examples. I know in Illinois, I think a bunch of the teachers talked about the MAP assessment, and there were a couple of other ones. And they explained, because we asked them, why they felt so much more comfortable with those as opposed to perhaps the state assessment. So I really commend the report for you to get the answers to those specific questions. Okay, did teachers bring up particular problems that have to do with tests being administered by computers?
There were a few. One was the keyboarding issue and how much that might impact the actual result on the test. And one that was interesting that came up was on what are the assessments that change when you answer a question? The assessments that will automatically adjust to the student's level, computer adaptive assessments, that sometimes kids would get stuck on the first question and wouldn't let them move forward. And one teacher was discussing how one of the students had a total meltdown because he didn't want to get the question wrong. And so therefore he just sat there staring at the screen for half an hour, unable to move forward. And she couldn't help him. She was trying to convince him just to put anything down to move forward. So that was kind of unexpected from what I thought you'd hear about the computer adaptive assessments. Some other issues that they thought was in some districts that we were in, some were taking the tests on paper and others were taking on computers, and they worried that too would impact the outcomes because maybe the computers are more engaging with the graphics and whatever than the students who were taking the paper tests. So there were sort of ancillary issues. It wasn't necessarily about the logging off technology or anything like that. It was more sort of how it was actually impacting the students' own experience in taking the exams that caused concern for them.
Okay, what non-academic skills do teachers say are getting the short shrift with the Common Core focus on academics? Well, they didn't actually name specific non-academic skills, but they did talk about, the ability, especially with the younger students, to just learn those basic social things that kids learn in school. If the teachers are under more pressure to get kids to meet a certain academic mark, and some of the kids are struggling, especially younger kids, they do tend to express, for all of you parents out there, younger children tend to express their frustration in ways that are not always well-suited socially to groups. So it was this idea of those other non-academic skills that can be developed within the classroom space: confidence, collaboration, problem solving, communication, all these kinds of things. I mean, this is a difficult thing to sort of, measure whether this is indeed really happening, but the teacher's perception was that with the classrooms becoming so much more highly charged for those younger students especially, some of that time that they may have spent doing other activities just simply had to be cut short because of that need to focus on the academics. Okay, I think we have, I'm going through our questions again just to make sure that we've answered everything. If anyone else has any other questions, please let us know or just write them into the text box here. We'd be happy to address them. But I will say that, there's some more. If many teachers support the Common Core, why do we keep hearing about teacher dissatisfaction with tests? Well, now that's a tricky question. As I said earlier, I think it goes with this idea that, and this is my opinion, is that the tests represent a whole new ballgame for teachers. They're new. The Common Core has been around for a while. And there's a lot of issues conflated with the new assessments that go with the sort of larger concerns about testing. So I think that is why you sort of see this disconnect, and I'm not so sure if it's teacher dissatisfaction with the test as just teachers starting to adapt to the newness of the test and everyone involved figuring out ways to make it maybe work a little bit better for both the teachers and the students. It's probably a little unrealistic to expect that the first year out of the hat, the tests were going to be, perfectly functional and everything was going to work great and nobody was going to have any problems. That's probably a little unrealistic for something so complex. So it seems like we'll have to keep monitoring progress on the assessments over the next couple of years, and in time, perhaps things will smooth out at the state and local level, and everyone will find their groove. But in the meantime, again, please go to the CEP website, check out what we have there with the report, the executive summary, the research appendix, if you'd like to know the ins and outs and the details of all that kind of stuff. And this webinar has been recorded, so it'll be available on the CEP website should you need it, along with the slides from the PowerPoint. And you can just reach out to us directly if you have any questions or want to talk about any of the issues that were in the report. We thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it, and we're going to close things out here now. Thank you.